Hi there. Originally, I was going to do this presentation with Lisa Stone from Preservation Services, but unfortunately, she couldn't be here. So this presentation will be more based on my background, which is in folklore and house museums, and more on the curatorial side. So, since the 1970s, the John Michael Kohler Art Center has been involved in the preservation, scholarly examination, and exhibition of works by art environment builders, and has worked closely with the Kohler Foundation and preservation professionals to preserve a wide range of remarkable art environment and collections. Along with many extensive projects that have preserved art environments in situ, some environments could not be preserved where they were built due to a range of ultimately unsurmountable obstacles. Preserving these components of such environments has entailed, as you all know, in-depth documentation by preservation professionals prior to moving the components and entire sites, and for my part, exploring a range of solutions to convey the power of these displaced works in ensuing exhibitions at the Art Center. The Art Center now cares for 30 large bodies of interrelated objects from dismantled art environments, which is the largest collection of environment components held at any museum. This presentation will discuss some of the critical questions that these disconnected environments present for me and the John Michael Kohler Art Center. I'll present a few case studies that I've worked on directly in which various key elements of the environments were identified and then expanded upon for exhibition purposes. And then I'll present 2 upcoming projects in which these thoughts are just starting to percolate, and I hope to lean on your expertise. In general, historic preservation theory states that all components of a site are fundamentally linked to and derive their meaning from where they were built. The place, the landscape, the property, and all of its histories and context form the essential basis of the site. Art environments are more than the sum of their parts. They are not merely site-specific, but they are life-specific, with clear aspects of an artist's biography, access to materials, and relationship to the surrounding community. However, just as a fragment of an ancient temple can inform and connect us to previous peoples and cultures, preserved elements of a site that cannot remain in situ while losing their connection to their original site and related contexts, nonetheless can retain a large measure of artistic value and offer hints of an important time and place in history. Disrupted and relocated elements of art environments offer curators enormous challenges, and exhibitions are opportunities to assess and reassess strategies. As a curator, my first step is to admit and respect that a rupture has occurred, that the loss of the original content and context has happened and is part of the ongoing reality. It's part of the story. I try to walk the line between recreating and evoking of museum displays and evolving narratives. Using preservation reports, site plans, extensive photographs, and oral histories, I evaluate the important qualities on a gut level and look for those things that convey a sense of the original. What is the one thing that will help the viewer leap the chasm? What will welcome the artworks into a museum setting with dignity and on its own terms? So I'm going to walk you through a few case studies that I've worked on. Ray Yoshida taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for nearly 4 decades and had an indelible influence on a generation of Chicago artists, including the Chicago Imagists. With his guidance, students learned to look beyond the confines of museums and Western art to explore source material that would propel their work into something personal and unique. Examining an array of African masks at the Field Museum, contemplating color in the weird and wonderful treasures of thrift shops, or understanding line in the works of self-taught artist Joseph Yoakum. Yoshida's idea was to instinctively follow your eye to whatever ignited your artistic sensibilities. This is an environment of a different sort, of course, although his home environment retains a highly personal and imaginative attachment to the vernacular. It is built through the process of collecting or arranging rather than making. Yet the physical properties of his home are integral to the production, presentation, and reception of art, and unifies the relationship between art making and site, and is still very much a situation that combines the ideas of art and making on one side and theories of place and home on the other. In this case, I focused on his home as source material and looked at his over 2,600 objects as a relationship to an artist and a teacher, I should say. The home collection itself was sectioned off into tableaus by preservation professionals, and I used their photos to design an exhibition and then surrounded the exhibition with Yoshida's seminal paintings and collages, as you can see here. Born in a small town of Callaway, Nebraska, Emery Blagden spent most of his life in the sandhill plains of Nebraska. In the 1950s, he began to build a large environment designed to channel the electrical currents of the earth and employ them to heal arthritis, cancer, and perhaps other ailments. Using various types of wire, aluminum foil, wax paper, beads, paints, and other elemental substances, Blagden made hundreds of individual elements for what he called his healing machine and rearranged them frequently according to the perceived flow of energy. Dan Dryden and Don Christensen, who witnessed and valued the healing machine while Blagden was still alive, eventually acquired the environment after the artist's death in 1986, and remarkably, all of his works and in his work shed and those comprised of the healing machine itself were purchased and remained together. Don and Dan made a site plan and designed a labeling system that the Art Center still uses today. Today, the works that comprise the healing machine, some 400 individual components, are part of the Art Center's collection. Cleaned and preserved, the healing machine was first installed in 2007 as part of the exhibition series Sublime Spaces and Visionary Worlds, spearheaded by a visionary curator and one of my mentors, Leslie Uppenberger. In this exhibition, the individual components were forefronted and introduced as part of an amazing survey of art environments. In 2013, the healing machine was reinstalled, and Leslie had an opportunity to present the environment in a new way. In this instance, Leslie and the Art Center team decided that the shed and the density of the healing machine components should be highlighted. Because of the work of preservationists and Art Center curators, we were able to bring to life this beautiful passage and oral history by Dan Dryden. This is a quote from Dan. "He walked me about 40 yards from the back door to the door of the shed. I don't remember what the conversation was. It seemed to dwell on the machines, the healing machines. By this time, it was very dark. No moon, none to speak of. It was just very, very dark. I remember that. We walked to the back, the shed. Emery unlocked the door, pulled the door open, and we stepped inside. There was not a great deal of light at the time in the shed, but I could see that there were masses of hanging wire from the walls in the ceiling and the outer room of the shed. The bottles that he'd been using for mineral salts within make his little potted tin flowers were sitting around the table. I looked around, and in just a few minutes there, he opened the inner door, which was padlocked, and the door to the main section. He opened this door, he reached around the corner, and threw open a couple of switches. All these Christmas lights came on, some stayed on, some were blinking on and off. These lights were strung around the top of the perimeter of the room, and there was also a middle section with pieces lights woven in with the construction. It hit me all at once, this panorama. Even though it was a small room, it looked like a vast panorama of these works that made it look 10 times larger than it was. The impact of this first viewing remained with me forever. It will remain with me forever. The power of it. Then juxtapose that with the fact that outside there was just miles and miles of nothing but sandhills and a few cornfields, a few cattle, otherwise absolutely nothing. And here it is, this whole world contained within a shed, a very, very powerful experience. In his Aurora, Illinois home, Dr. Charles Smith created a memorial and a history museum dedicated to Africans and African Americans. His efforts began as a call to attention to the poor treatment of African American soldiers in and after the Vietnam War. However, it expanded to encompass events and people from the slave trade to the present day. Smith used the detritus of his own neighborhood, melded with concrete mixture to make hundreds of figures chronicling the struggles and victories of the African American history and culture. Smith himself described walking through the environment as being inside a collage. His environment grew organically, yet with unmatched determination. The site's flux and fluidity were central to his process, and when Smith was not making new sculptures, he was rearranging others such that the audience never had the same experience twice. As Lisa Sohn observed, the most constant element of the site was that of change. And so with Dr. Charles Smith, it was admitting that recreating the elements of this chaotic and constantly changing, at the end, blighted property would feel contrived. Instead, with Dr. Charles Smith's blessing, hundreds of sculptures were treated as individual works, completely severed from their original context. Sculptures were stabilized and cleaned, and because they were restored, they survived and flourished in collections across the U.S. And so Dr. Charles Smith's message and history lessons could be seen across the country and not just in Aurora, Illinois. The artist himself moved on and flourished, continuing his work in a new location to this day in Louisiana. This is a rare and perhaps unique example. Sanford Darling was born in Santa Barbara, California, and after service in World War I, he worked as a Hollywood stuntman, a commercial fisherman, a chiropractor, and as an engineer for General Petroleum. After 25 years at GP, he retired in 1959. When his wife died shortly thereafter, Darling embarked on 2 extended trips to Europe and the Far East. Upon his return to Santa Barbara in 1963, he began to relive those adventures, and he began recreating small scenes of the places that he had visited. By the time of his death in 1973, Darling had been painting for 10 years and had produced over 1,000 paintings. His art environment was disassembled, and paintings and other objects from the house were sold to private collectors. In this particular case, I sent this image to collectors and colleagues in the field, along with a checklist of the Art Center's 59 paintings, to see if they could help me understand if what we had in the Art Center was a specific portion of the house or a varied selection of paintings. As it turned out, it was more of a selection than a section, so I needed to take a new approach and started to think about Sanford Darling's artistic motivation. I was struck by 2 things. One, this idea of visual memories and the artist's depiction of formative places. And 2, that he covered an entire house with these memories. Darling was trying to show us that what these places looked like and what they felt like in a visual way. And in some ways, I felt like he was a curator at the John Michael Kohler Art Center, showing me the powers of places that I could not go to. So my approach was to include Sanford Darling's installation in a group exhibition of artists and works of art that portray formative places. That is, they answer the question, without the ability to visit a site, how would you convey its formative qualities and its sense of place? The exhibition consisted of works by emerging artists, self-taught artists, and some site-specific installations. For the House of 1,000 Paintings, we designed a specific exhibition display unit reminiscent of a front stoop and painted it in a grayscale to convey the distance or that rupture. I was able to match one of the paintings on the image, and the rest were placed to reinforce the idea that the paintings were puzzle pieces on an artist's home. The exhibition also included works by Heather Benning. Oops, did I go that way? Yes, sorry. Heather Benning's Field Doll features a 12-foot sculptural adaptation of her childhood doll and a series of photographs in which she, in a very labor-intensive way, brings this doll to formative places in her life in Canada. By manipulating the scale of the doll, Benning pushes the viewer to contemplate its role in providing that sense of familiarity and security. We also invited Heather Benning to come to Sheboygan and crowdsourced formative places from our Sheboygan residents and brought the doll to various locations in Sheboygan, and here it is in front of the John Michael Kohler's original home. Using a 35mm camera, Alexander LaRose superimposed footage from 32 walks along a small path leading from his home, from his parents' backyard to his favorite lake. Documenting his treks from 2008 to 2012, he's layering experiences on film. The result is a 10-minute film that blends memory and experience. Inspired by the belief that home is more of a state of mind rather than a place on a map, Scott Carter's interest in creating this installation stems from two distinct aspects in his life. The first is his experience as a contractor, attuned to the sounds of construction as he built other people's suburban dream homes. The second is the time of teaching himself to play drums in his home garage as a teen trying to find his place. The installation, made of drywall and wallpaper, was mechanized to beat in various rhythmic patterns and constructed to snake the Art Center's own architecture. Southern vernacular architecture was celebrated in Beverly Buchanan's photographs and constructions. These small-scale sculptures combine the aesthetics of both of homes in the rural South and the weathered conditions of imagined archaeological artifacts. Buchanan was inspired by childhood visits with her father to the farms of the Carolinas, and remembering the look and the feel of these structures had been a strong focus. She built the sculptures both from memory and from her photographs. Building installations out of recycled, oops. Oh no. This always happens to me. Should I click OK? Is that good? Okay, I'll keep going. Where am I? Building installations out of recycled and found materials. Sabir and Gardelman from New York and Illinois make large-scale structures that accommodate actual use. In this new project designed specifically for the Art Center, they turn their attention to the skate ramp, revealing it as a place of contemplation and a means of working through a struggle. The skate ramp grotto hybrid embodies the unmistakable mark the skate park had on their lives as a place of ritual and camaraderie. And for those who know, they are also inspired by Jesse Howard. Just this past weekend on Sunday, we invited the local skateboarding community into our galleries to say goodbye to the piece through a skateboarding event. Both communities were scared, I have to admit. Borden Carleton is a Canadian town located on Prince Edward Island and traces its history to the island's requirement to connect to the mainland for transport of people and goods. Once a vibrant port town servicing regular ferry traffic across the Northumberland Strait, the town began to decline in 1992 when plans to replace ferry service with a permanent bridge began. In 2010, the community granted artist Kim Morgan permission to cast one of their local range lights in latex. Once a proud beacon of deliverance, the structure stood derelict, no longer needed as a navigational aid. The two-week casting process involved a team of artists and volunteers from the community who carefully painted 7 layers of liquid rubber latex over the interior and exterior of the structure. The sensitive medium recorded and remembered every detail, from peeling paint on the shingles to the wood grain and insect boreholes. And actually, as a footnote to this, since this process, the town has now gone through the process of getting this on this range light on the Register of Historic Places. Oops, not yet. Overall, the exhibition, entitled "This Must Be the Place," focused on artists depicting their powerful places and underscoring the role of one's habitat in the formation of the self. And I hope brought Sanford Darling's work into discussion with other artists, both contemporary and self-taught, and honored his own artistic motivation. Now I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about future projects and lean on your expertise. The Art Center is heading towards its 50th anniversary in 2017, and we will be reinstalling our collection of vernacular art environments to celebrate. 2 particular environments are at the forefront of my mind. Aiming to style himself as the singing rhinestone cowboy modeled after Glenn Campbell's song, Lloyd Boylan of Macomb, Mississippi, became the maker of a remarkable art environment. To boost his spirits, he turned a brightly colored suit into a painted and festooned glamour costume and headed to town with his harmonica. He enjoyed the laughter and the attention the decorated suit received, and he quickly became known as the original rhinestone cowboy. His persona needed a backdrop, and thus he embellished his small home with glitter, cut paper, magazine pictures, ornaments, and spangles. People came from miles around to visit the Holy Jewel home and the rhinestone cowboy that lived there. After Boylan's death in 1995, the house was slated for demolition, but was saved virtually at the last minute in front of a wrecking crew and dismantled piece by piece. What strikes me as so interesting is the juxtaposition between the inside and the outside of the house. The exterior looks so humble and unassuming, but the inside, as we saw, is completely dazzling, to say the least. Knowing that Boylan adopted this persona of the rhinestone cowboy as a means to help with some sort of depression brings up notions of interiority and self-invention. And I think what would work well would to keep that idea of the humble exterior and that dazzling interior as a mystery. However, this exterior that was installed in 2007 is kind of this composite board, and we're trying to figure out, and I'll ask you whether you think we should just reshingle it as a house. Because this environment, as many environments, were saved by the skin of their teeth at the last hour, more research and oral histories is needed to be able to bring this house to exhibition in 2017. So my new plan leading up to the exhibition opening in 2017 is to host a preservation lab in one of our galleries for the year of 2016 and invite curators, prep staff, preservationists, restorers, glitter experts to come and talk to us about how we put this house back together again. I hope in this way we are giving back some of that time that was lost at that final hour, but also allow the public to learn a little bit about the intricacies and complex decisions involved in the preservation and curation of art environments. And now for the last case study, which is Mary Knowles' home. In and around the cottage on Lake Michigan shore, just north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Mary Knowles created a vivid, multi-dimensional environment. She viewed virtually anything as potential material for art making and tried her hand at everything. In addition to concrete sculptures on her property, Knowles made wooden sculptures, paintings, jewelry, and pottery. What influenced her the most, however, was the immense lake lying just outside her door, Lake Michigan. Knowles envisioned a world beneath the waves where creatures lived in funny and interesting ways. A cast of characters reemerged in her paintings, sculptures, and bas-relief wooden friezes that enveloped her small home. The environment Knowles made was highly expressive of both her artistic character and that of the lakeshore cottage and yard. Currently, Mary Knowles' home is still in Fox Point, Wisconsin, but the future is uncertain. The attempt to preserve Mary Knowles' environment has a long history that is filled with one challenge after another. And last year, Ruth Kohler hosted a panel discussion in Milwaukee about the future of Mary Knowles, so the next passages derive directly from her speech. The relationship between Mary Knowles and the Kohler Foundation began in 1987 when they became acquainted with Mary and began a dialogue with her about the significance of her art as an environment. Eventually, they began to discuss the importance of preserving it, and through time, Mary became more and more enthusiastic about restoring her art in situ. Nevertheless, vandalism and theft continued to plague her, and throughout her life, her house was always kind of colloquially known as the witch's house, so she had to take security measures while alive to protect herself and her home. In 1996, Mary gifted individual works of art to the Kohler Foundation for conservation and eventually gifted it to the Art Center. The Kohler Foundation continued to help with Mary with repairs and replacements on her property, and in 2001, she decided to bequeath her home to KFI upon her death. A doctoral student assisted with the documentation of her site in 2002, and conservation began that year. In 2003, a new neighbor across the street who was a vocal opponent to the site vowed to keep Mary's property closed to the public and prevent the idea of the site becoming a museum. By 2005, area police began to issue weekly citations to the Kohler Foundation the preservations for museum use of the property, although public involvement was already heavily restricted and most of the museum work that was happening was preservation. About the same time, the National and Wisconsin Registers of Historic Places named Mary's site to their roster. In 2005, the Wisconsin Trust of Historic Preservation named Mary Knoll the site of the 10 most endangered list on Wisconsin. A month later, the Fox Point, which is her community historic preservation committee, met at the foundation's request, but over 100 angry residents attended the meeting sporting badges that said no museum. In 2006 and 2007, the Kohler Foundation continued to discuss the future of the Mary Knoll property amidst continuing strong neighborhood opposition. Meanwhile, numerous repairs and improvements to the security were completed. In 2007, a local judge agreed to live on site to aid in community relations and help with security. In 2012, the Kohler Foundation officially gifted the Knoll property to the Art Center, and we began a feasibility study to research other options of the future of the site. A preservation architect was brought on site to conduct a thorough survey and condition assessments of the property. Still pursuing the idea of a museum, the Art Center worked with a consultant to conduct research into various opinions of the neighbors by means of in-person meetings, phones, and email surveys. This research identified Fox Point residents who favored in situ preservation, those who would support an actual cultural zoning change that would allow for a museum, and those who, whether they appreciated the property or not, wanted it moved. In 2013, of October, wanting the neighbors' input on how to shape a modest proposal for that cultural overlay needed for the museum, the Art Center held an informal exchange with Fox Point neighbors and the public. A number of guidelines were presented for limited access, with by appointment only advance reservations, limited daytime hours, the use of a shuttle van with no individual visitor parking on site, among other neighborhood-friendly elements. The vast majority of the neighborhood participants at the meeting strongly and vocally opposed those guidelines. So the Art Center has begun to research the intricacies and the implications of moving the house and the sculptures at the site of the Sheboygan County, and moving the house and the sculptures to a site in our Sheboygan County. So the goal for me now is not so much how to present displaced components of an art environment, but literally how to move a mountain, and this is new for me. Here are some of the factors that I am thinking about when I think about moving Mary Knoll's house. The interior of the house. Every wall, the floor, the curtains are painted or altered. The range of media that Mary engaged with, her studio was extensive, as we saw, pottery, jewelry, and paintings, and they all require different care and preservation and presentation. The proximity to the lake with mature trees, the context of a neighborhood. Unlike other environments that I know, her suburban location presented many challenges to the site itself and plays an ultimately important role in the development of the environment. Would we put up chain link fence if we moved it? Knoll experienced vandalism throughout the entire building of her property, and I think that's part of the history. Mary Knoll lived by herself for most of her life and mostly shared her company with her dogs, and they are buried on the property, and as a dog lover, do we bring those with us too? At this stage in the preservation process of Mary Knoll's house, there are no answers, only questions. Can it be moved? What should be moved? Where will it go? What will we gain from moving the house? What will we lose? What factors contribute to deeming a complete relocation a preservation success? When is it considered unsuccessful? It's always the Art Center's preference to preserve and work with art environments preserved in situ wherever possible. But we don't know the future of the Mary Knoll house. We do have a great model to go by with the James Tellon Woodland Sculpture Garden, in which now the houses are used for community events and artist housing that come to install. And we'd much rather keep Mary Knoll's house where it is and be accessible to the public, but it's just not possible at this moment. So in the meantime, I hope that I've shown you different curatorial strategies for displaced art environments and hopefully underscore the important work that you do in site plans, preservation records, oral histories, and photographs. Thank you.